Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Johnson. I'm the director of the Seawolf Debate program, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this evening's debate. The Arguing Alaska Debate Series is sponsored by UAA's Seawolf Debate program and by the Alaska Dispatch News. You may know the Seawolf Debate program for its competitive mission, in which we send our students throughout the nation and across the world to compete against other colleges and universities in intercollegiate competitive debate. But we also have a very robust service agenda that we serve. We have debating leagues for middle school students. We participate in the promotion of debate at the high school level. We do a number of public events and workshops for teachers and students, all designed to get people speaking and talking with each other in ways that are productive and effective. So the Arguing Alaska series fits neatly into our service mission there. One of the contests that we're currently running is something called Debating Alaska's Fiscal Future. It is a project that we are co-sponsoring with the Atwood Foundation, with North Rim Bank, and with a variety of other sponsors to give young people a chance to weigh in on Alaska's fiscal future. If you're interested in that contest, I would encourage you to take a look at our website. It's debatingakfuture.com. We've had a number of entries in that contest, and we're going to turn it over to the public very soon to get a chance to look at those debates that the students have produced and vote on the ones that they think do the best job. Eventually, we're going to distribute over $10,000 in prizes to those students, so we're very pleased to be part of that as well. Before I launch into all the introduction for tonight's debate, I would encourage you to connect with us. There are a variety of ways to do so. Our main website is seawolfdebate.com. If you visit there, you'll find a whole bunch of information about what we do and when we do it. You have an option to sign up for our mailing list to be part of announcements for upcoming events that we sponsor, and generally keep an eye on the competitive success and the community service that our program undertakes. There's also a table out in the lobby that allows you to sign up if you prefer to do so the old-fashioned way. That'll also get your name on a mailing list. It will keep you informed about the things that we're doing. But for the debate, I usually open these debates by offering some comments and context for the topic being debated, and I eventually will tonight. But before I do that, I want to talk about debate itself. Not the intellectual sport in which UAA students compete, but the deliberative discourse that is the engine of our democracy. It likely comes as no surprise that as a professional devoted to the free exchange of ideas, I'm concerned about the state of political debate in our country. But I've said that before. Given the circumstances in which we currently find ourselves, the word concern doesn't capture the level of my anxiety about our ability to talk with one another. I have never lived during a time when the divides between the people in our country seemed so present, when the politics of outrage seemed to dominate the spaces in which we used to talk to one another. I know that these times have existed in the past, but I also know that how these periods resolve depend largely on the choices that we make. And let me be clear, this is not a partisan issue. There is much blame to go around for the tone and tenor of our political discussion. But, importantly, blaming is part of the problem. Every time one side justifies its actions by using the low point of its opponent's behavior as a moral standard, we sink further into the morass. And that morass is now beginning to affect not only our ability, but in some cases, our willingness to talk to our fellow Americans. Healthy, robust debate is not merely one democratic virtue among many. It is the alpha and omega of our self-determination. Our ability to govern ourselves is ensured only so long as we have a way to address peacefully the conflicts that will inevitably rise between us. And that's the key word, peacefully. For those who refuse to acknowledge their opponents as fully realized human beings with interests and motivations other than pure malevolence, for those whose default strategy is to demonize and dehumanize the other, for those who seek to stymie discussion between citizens by excluding them from the conversation, I have a question. What is your end game? Because after all is said and done, there are only two ways to get other people to do what you want them to do: to persuade them or to coerce them. And coercion sounds satisfying, as if we could impose our will upon others and force them to do what we want them to do. But history tells us that the outcome of coercion, regardless of its origin, is violence. So again, I ask, what is your end game? Are you so certain of your moral superiority that you're ready to stand and say that those who disagree with you don't deserve to exist? My answer to this question is to redouble my commitment to debate, to practice the techniques of deliberative conflict resolution, not only to serve my own goals, but to model that for others, and in so doing, to safeguard the foundations of self-governance. To that end, I offer 3 guiding principles for debate, whether the one we'll participate in tonight or the ones that we'll inevitably have in conversations and comment sections and social media platforms after this debate ends. I call them the 3 T's of public discourse: tolerance, thoughtfulness, and truth. By tolerance, I mean that you accept those with whom you disagree as you accept yourself, as members of a community, as citizens of a country, as fellow human beings. Of course, we'll disagree, but those with whom we disagree aren't going away. So you must start by affirming their right to hold and express opinions different from yours. Thoughtfulness is a commitment to remaining skeptical and employing the tools of criticism, especially to your own beliefs. No opinion should go untested. No rationale is exempt from scrutiny. And faith in clear, critical thought is the foundation of a debate, that an argument, well articulated and properly supported, can persuade those who share your commitment. Ultimately, a devotion to truth is both a precursor for and the desired end of our debates. Understanding the difference between claims about what is and what should be is a first step toward meeting those with whom we disagree on the same plane of reality. And that meeting, that agreement to recognize things as they are, is a prerequisite to allowing debate to help us sort out what should be. So tonight, I invite you to join me in putting these principles into action. We're fortunate to live in a state that is so supportive of debate. Alaskans don't fall neatly into political categories like left and right, conservative and liberal. In every resident who is deeply committed to the Alaskan virtues of independence and self-reliance, you'll find a person who will go far out of their way to offer a helping hand in a time of need. We are all both libertarian and liberal. Keep that in mind when participating tonight in this debate, either when listening or when asking questions. And I'll make the same offer that I've made at other debates like this. If you don't feel like you can abide by these principles, I will personally refund your ticket price right now. And that's not hyperbole. If you feel like you can't abide by those simple rules and engage your fellow community members in productive and civil discussion, I've got $15, as many times as it takes, to release you from your obligation to be here. No takers? Good, thank you. So over the weekend, we inaugurated a new president. It's appropriate that we spend some time talking about what that means for our state. Will what makes our state unique be served or compromised by our new national leadership? Especially in the context of the fiscal uncertainty with which we find ourselves, what will be the impact of changes to our nation's trade, energy, immigration, healthcare, and environmental policy? My hope is that the arguments exchanged tonight will allow us to set aside some of the vitriol and vengeance and focus on the practical questions of public policy. The motion for tonight's debate is Alaska will thrive under a Trump presidency. Note that this motion is not a referendum on our president's character. It asks a very specific question. How will Alaska fare under this new administration? I invite you to keep that in mind as you consider the arguments made by both of these teams. We'll interrogate this motion in a debate organized into 3 phases. In the first phase, we'll allow the advocates to develop a series of speeches for and against the motion. We'll begin by hearing from the proposition and alternate between the proposition and the opposition until each of our 4 speakers has had their 8-minute opportunity to establish their position. In phase 2, we'll open the floor to questions, exchanged between the teams and from the audience. In the final phase, we'll provide each team a 5-minute summary speech to close their position. In this phase, the opposition will have the first word, and the proposition will close the debate. On the screen behind me, you'll see a poll. That poll automatically updates when you send a text to the number 37607. This poll is critical to how we decide the outcome of these debates. What we do is take a survey of the audience's attitude before the debate begins, and then we allow you to listen to the arguments exchanged between the teams. We open a second poll at the close of the debate and ask you to register your opinion now that you've heard the persuasive efforts of both sides. We then award the win to the team that causes the greatest shift in the audience's attitude as a result of their arguments. So if you haven't yet done so, take out your cell phones right now, text one of those three codes that corresponds with whether you presently agree with, disagree with, or prefer to remain neutral into the number 37607, and we'll record your attitude before this debate begins. Once you've done so, if you would also take a second to silence your cell phones so they don't go off in the middle of the debate, we, all of us, would greatly appreciate that. Let me take a moment now to introduce the debaters. Arguing that Alaska will thrive under the Trump presidency are Jim Crawford and Sam Erickson. Jim Crawford most recently served as the chair for the Trump in Alaska campaign, but he's been involved in his Alaskan community for much longer. As an alumnus of UAF, Jim has worked in real estate in Alaska since 1990. He twice served as president of the Better Business Bureau of Alaska and writes regularly on politics and business for the Alaska Dispatch News. Jim also managed the Alaska campaigns of Ronald Reagan in 1980 and 1984, and George Bush in 1988 and 92. So he's no stranger to effective public discourse. His partner, Sam Erickson, is a junior majoring in finance and economics. A graduate of Eagle River High School, Sam was a state champion in high school debating and has carried that success on to UAA, where he took top honors at last year's Western Regional Championships and advanced to the semifinal round of the U.S. Universities Debating Championships. Sam also serves as the president of UAA's student body. Arguing that Alaska isn't likely to thrive under Trump's presidency are John Havelock and Jacob Shirklift. John Havelock is a longtime figure in local and national politics. A graduate of both Harvard University and Harvard Law, John served as Attorney General for the state of Alaska, during which he managed the state's responsibilities related to the Alaska Natives Claims Settlement Act. He's also been a faculty member at UAA, where he was responsible for developing UAA's Justice Center. He currently contributes as a columnist to the Alaska Dispatch News. Jacob Shirklift graduated from Chugiak High School and is a junior majoring in political science and economics. Like Sam, Jacob is passionate about debating. In addition to his competitive success, Jacob volunteers his time to coach middle school students who compete in the Seawolf Debate program's Middle School Debate League. Typically, Jacob and Sam aren't partners in competitive debate on the Seawolf Debate team. In fact, the only time they've competed together was at the Colorado College Tournament in October of 2016, where they took top honors despite never having debated in competition together before. To say that I'm looking forward to their time together as a partnership after this debate is an understatement. Which brings me to an important note about tonight's debate, particularly if you've attended other Arguing Alaska debates. Two of tonight's debaters are speaking to their convictions. Obviously, as chair of Trump's Alaska campaign, Mr. Crawford is enthusiastic at the prospects of President Trump's leadership. Mr. Havelock, on the other hand, has written articles skeptical of our president's policies in the Alaska Dispatch News. But the opinions of the other two members of those teams should be more of a mystery. We're trying something new in tonight's debate by bringing in a couple of debating experts. Sam and Jacob are largely responsible for testing each side's arguments against the other, something for which their debating experience prepares them well. But, as in a competitive debate, they didn't have any say about which side they would represent in tonight's debate. Keep that in mind when you're tempted to judge them for the arguments they make, regardless of which arguments they might represent. It is entirely possible that their personal convictions are different than the arguments they're charged with making. With that then, I am delighted to call this House to order and call upon our first speaker from the pro side, Mr. Crawford, to argue in 8 minutes the case for why Alaska will thrive under Trump's presidency. Hear, hear.
Thank you, Steve. Great introduction, great time to be here and be in Alaska. Tonight's proposition is that Alaska will thrive under a Trump presidency, and I agree wholeheartedly. I agree wholeheartedly because I've gotten to know Donald Trump over the last year, and I'm very impressed with the quality of his appointments. You don't do anything as an administration or as a president without putting a proper team behind you. I had the honor in 1984 of having lunch in the White House with Ronald Reagan. There were 6 of us around the table. He had been shot some months before, and he divulged some state secrets, which I was pretty impressed with. One was eat your carrots every day. The White House chef gave him carrots, he ate them. That was doctor's orders. He was a great guy, loved to tell stories, and I'd love to tell you stories, but I've got to do this debate. I want you to look at Rex Tillerson. I want you to look at General Mattis. I want you to look at Interior Secretary Zinke and Scott Pruitt. Those are 4 senior members of an administration that is as qualified as I've ever seen in a lot of years in politics. I got my start in politics working for Ted Stevens, and it was great fun. He wanted us to be actively involved in Alaska. He wanted to have a team that was pro-development, and he described it as job creators. That's what we need in Alaska to have a thriving economy, and President Trump can deliver that for us. Now, because I was a banker for a long time, mortgage banking, real estate, we do things by matrix. We establish a matrix, and I like to establish goals and objectives on a matrix scale. So my matrix for Alaska to determine whether or not Trump can be successful is to put up a goal. We have 339,000 people employed in the state of Alaska. Last year we lost 5,600 jobs in Alaska. If we continue to lose jobs, we'll continue in our recession, and that is not what we need as Alaskans. That's not a partisan statement. It's not a particularly Trump statement. It's a statement where we need the federal government to assist us, not to stop our economy, but to grow our economy. So my goal that I would like to establish for Alaska is 100,000 new net jobs for Alaska over the first 4 years of a Trump presidency. And let me tell you how those are attainable. I've got some examples. Ted Stevens had a great idea, and that was to move Elmendorf and Fort Rich across Cook Inlet. We've got land, we can build a new base, and we can bring back troops from Tokyo, which is the single most expensive siting place for military in the world, and Berlin, and other non-paying members of NATO. We can be a training site for a new naval base here in Alaska. We can be a training site for the Air Force. Now, there's a difference when you do bombing and strafing runs in California, you actually wipe out people. But when you do it here, you might get a moose every once in a while, but that's about it. So we are a great military site. Don't forget, Alaska is 9 hours from 90% of the world's population. That has huge impact strategically for the military. It also has tremendous impact on opening up our other areas of economic growth. Transportation, our air freight industry brought 15,000 new jobs, net new jobs, to Alaska over about a 10-year period of time. We need to push that. You know, there is a shortage of pilots for jets that's estimated to be 1,000 pilots per year. Let's go train those pilots in Alaska. We've got the facility to do that. Boeing can expand their capability here. We have Kulis Air Guard Base. Now, a couple other things. The military expansion could get us 50,000 new troops. That's 50,000 new jobs. Multiplier effect is supposedly 7, although I don't think it really works that way. But let's just count that as 50,000 jobs over a 4-year period of time. Now, we're going to open ANWR. We're going to open ANWR because the people who wanted to stop opening ANWR are gone. The Republicans have the House, the Republicans have the Senate, the Republicans have the White House. But we are going to open ANWR. And one of the ideas that I have that I'd like to present to each of you, especially if you're involved in the university. Thought a lot about the university, and what I hear, what I see in the press all the time is how bad things are and how we have to cut everything back. I think what we have to do is make the 150,000 acres of university land productive. My debate partner and I looked for a week to find what the revenue was on the 150,000 acres of ground. Now, I'm in the real estate business, so I guess I understand that. From real estate, what I would do is I would invest that 150,000 and I would make sure that revenue was coming out sufficient to be able to pay everybody's education in Alaska. Let me give you a land swap that would work real well. The 3-mile limit off of Alaska is state-owned ground all the way around. Now, let me be clear. The 3-mile between mean high tide and 3 miles out off of ANWR is state ground. I would like to see us swap some University of Alaska ground for that ground and start pumping oil into the University of Alaska to be able to create the economics of a thriving economy for our sons and daughters and students at the University of Alaska system. I think that would be an appropriate way to do it. Now, that's not necessarily a Trump position, but the reason why Trump would be actively involved in that is because it could be an example for other states on how to self-fund education rather than leaving it to the questions of the legislature. The legislature has not done real well on making some of those decisions over the late. Now, I'm about out of time. I'm going to give you 3 other things: expand mining, shut down the EPA. The EPA is in the business of regulating mud puddles in Anchorage, Alaska. It needs to stop. It needs to stop now. And then I would like to see, personally, the development of Alaska's forest. The forest industry has been shut down in Alaska. It can generate 10,000 jobs. If you put all those jobs together over a 4-year period of time, you build a thriving economy under a Trump presidency. Thank you very much.
So we've heard the first set of arguments on behalf of the motion. We'll turn our attention now to the opposition side, invite Professor Havelock to the podium to articulate the con side's position on whether or not Alaska will thrive under a Trump presidency.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for your leadership of this debate program, which is a great asset to the university and to the students that participate. Greetings also to Jim and Sam, who, we live up to the standard that you set, Steve, because Jim and I have been, although we are politically not quite polar opposites, but we are very far that way. Nonetheless, we're friends, and we'll remain friends after this debate, I hope.
Hear,
hear. I think the question that is proposed before you needs a context, and meaning a context of where Alaska is now and what is going on here in the state. And if you've looked at the economic analysis that's been presented in the newspapers that are coming out of ICER and out of other economics, you'll see that the state is heading for a economic downturn of considerable magnitude. This reflects, I might add, my 3 or 4 years of columns on the subject, which say that the legislature has to do something about this. That it is, and indeed the Senate the failure of Senate leadership, it seems to me, is assuring that Alaska will live in a swamp of economic downturn, whatever the Trump administration may do. Well, that does not mean that the Trump administration will not have some effects. And so the state is in a swamp. I think the policies that have so far been articulated by the president and his initial cabinet appointees are mud pies that are being thrown into that swamp. There are four that I am picking on for articulation here, although there are a great many others that are dangerous. The four biggies from my point of view start off with trade policy, then environmental and resource development is number 2. The third one, what was the third one? Oh yeah, all right. Oh, maybe I can get a cabinet appointment out of it, I don't know. Anyway, the third one in my mind is national security and military policy, which my friend Jim has already commented on to some point. And the fourth one is national budget policy. Each of these is, from my point of view, as its impacts on Alaska, amounts to a Trumpian failure, a disaster. It is the greatest, the biggest, the incredible, unbelievable, so great, so big disaster that Trump has a habit of putting together. Let me start with the trade policy issues. America has a long-standing participation and effort to globalize and internationalize economic benefits. And the result of that has been an enormous growth on a global scale, which has included the United States. Now, when President Trump was campaigning, he said, well, we need to have tariffs because, I need to punish these people that will appeal to the people who live in the mountain area who lost jobs. Import policy. Tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, I think it's billions of dollars, if I remember correctly. So that is maybe the worst effect that I anticipate for Alaska, that destruction of our economy. Maybe the only one I can think of might be a little bit worse, which I'm not going to talk about, is their smashing of affordable care, which appears to be a part of the program. The second issue I want to touch on is the environmental and federal overreach issues that they talk about. I mean, I heard him say, let's get rid of the EPA. Swell. How about you all ready for another Exxon Valdez? How about the Pebble Mine? Huh? If any of you involved in the fisheries, you want to see the Pebble Mine go with zero environmental review, except what a pathetic level, frankly, that the state might be able to put together. No. And what is the other aspect of the federal overreach repeal is duties passed back to the state, which we're not in a financial position to do. Voucherism, using vouchers for everything. That just means reduce federal expenditure at state expense. So that would be another of the major issues. Did I hear a bell?
1 minute remaining.
But how about giving me 5? No, okay. Anyway, I'll give the third one, just to get the third mud pie, is military national security. The president has talked about let's bring on the arms race. Unfortunately, the references there are all wrong in the sense that Jim had put up, because where the South China Sea is the place where the action is going to be. we're now friends with Russia, remember, between Tillerson and the president. And so what's the purpose of having any military establishment here? And we're closer to the Ukraine than we are to the South China Sea, so there's nothing going there. The general mud pie of tax and fiscal policy, it will just simply increase the effect of inflation. He's taxing nobody and he's spending like crazy, and reducing case. So thank you very much for your attention. Will Alaska thrive under the Trump presidency? Who are you kidding?
Much appreciation to Mr. Havelock for offering his opinion on that. We're going to now turn to the second part of this first phase of the debate and give our second proposition pro-side speaker a shot at the motion. Sam Erickson, if you would step to the podium and give us some reasons why you believe that Alaska will thrive under the Trump presidency.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming out tonight. Hi, Mom. Jim, John, thanks for being here. I'm sure you'll still be great friends after this. Jacob, wish I could say the same, but, you know, we try our best. Now, as intimidated as I am by Team Bowtie over here, unfortunately, much like their neckwear, their economic analysis and examples of Smoot-Hawley tariffs went out of style in the 1930s. What we're dealing with is a globalized economy, but more than that, a domestic economy that has plenty of potential to pick up the slack and plenty of potential to turn inwards, to focus on America as not only an exporter, but a consumer of Alaskan goods. That's what I'm going to talk about a lot in my constructive material, building on the analysis that Jim brought to you about oil and adding even more about copper. Before I do that, though, I'd like to engage with some deconstruction on what was brought to us by John. Now, he tells us that ICER and Northern Economics have made the call that we're headed for an economic slump no matter what. Well, as a finance major, I can tell you that historically, predicting the economy is a shell game, and any report that says that we're going anywhere should be scrutinized pretty closely, especially if it doesn't take into account a lot of the actions that Trump is going to put in place. Additionally, he tries to scare us with this word of tariffs, right? That tariffs are going to destroy the Alaskan economy. But much like the other T word that's bandied around a lot to scare people, that is taxes, tariffs do and can have a legitimate economic purpose. That is to raise money, to focus production of an economy upon a particular good where we might have an advantage, and to ensure that that good can have a domestic market so that people can buy goods that are American, that are quality, and can use that money in their own local economies. We don't think just saying tariff is enough or saying Smoot-Hawley is enough. They have to do a lot more work to prove to us why specifically these tariffs will do such harm. Moving on, additionally, he tells us under the environmental aspect that we're going to have just another Exxon Valdez every few years. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure the EPA was around when the Exxon Valdez went under. I don't think we need another set of regulations saying you can't spill more oil in the water than you did last time. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, and I don't think just getting rid of the EPA means that people are going to start dumping oil in the water. It's still not very good for business. And lastly, he tells us that the South China Sea is going to be the hotspot of conflict, and we're friends with Russia, so we don't have to worry about military placement. Well, as Jim mentioned quite specifically, the aspect of Alaska that makes it so strategically valuable and unique is that it is, in many cases, our closest point to jump off to get to Russia or Japan or Korea or the South China Sea or many of these potential hotspots that could be flaring up. That is why Alaska became so strategically valuable during the Cold War, and it's why it will continue to remain so. And more troops coming to Anchorage, as is likely, will mean more money in the domestic economy, more things being bought and sold locally, and a far greater ability for that economy to develop moving into the future. Now I'm going to move into some additional analysis, strengthening what Jim brought to this debate. And I'd like to begin this with analysis of what was a concession that was made wisely on John's part, where he tells us that, look, Alaska is still an extraction-based economy. And this is fundamentally true. And that's why this round is so important. Because Alaska is not going to transition into a service-based New York City-style finance capital of the world in the next few years. Our money is made by digging things out of the ground and selling them for the most part, and it's going to remain that way. So it is extremely important and extremely valuable that we have a president in office now who recognizes the value of getting out of the way, ensuring that we can dig things out of the ground, and get about the business of making ourselves wealthy the way that we have in the past. I'm going to examine this explicitly through the analysis that Jim gave to you, talking about ANWR, which has been tied up in red tape and regulatory purgatory for decades now. When we are able to open up that significant expanse of land for drilling to fill the pipeline again so it's actually pumping at capacity instead of just pumping at a quarter or whatever it is these days, that provides a tremendous economic boost to the state when we have such a major dependence upon oil revenue. But additionally, we're not just talking about oil in this state. There are significant natural resources that have gone untapped. I'm going to talk now explicitly about the Pebble Mine, which is engaging with the material that John brought to you. And I think it's clear that economic development in the state of Alaska can be done safely. We've managed to dig holes in the Arctic for quite a while without incredibly destroying the environment. I think it's safe to say we can probably take care of it when there's such an incentive to also protect the salmon industry. But let's talk about Pebble Mine even more for a moment. There's going to be 4 things to note here. First, that Pebble Mine contains not just North America's largest potential supply of gold, but also its greatest discovered supply of copper, about 80 years' worth of copper. This is extremely important because copper is a vital ingredient in the production of renewable technology. That is, anything that uses, for example, hybrid cars or windmills, things that have to store a lot of electricity for a renewable future, mean that you're going to need a lot of copper. The average hybrid vehicle contains almost 3 to 4 times as much copper as a regular car. This is extremely important because demand for this is set to skyrocket globally. Experts estimate that global demand for copper is going to double by 2025. China's demand alone is up to 20% by the end of the decade, and they import nearly 40% of the world's copper. What this means is that Alaska is standing on a potential motherlode of economic development to sell to the rest of the world as we begin to transition to a more green, more renewable-focused economy. And if they try to tell you that tariffs are going to stop this, we say that it's not just China that is looking to develop renewable technology. The United States is a leader in this. The massive Cape Cod wind farm, which just came online in Massachusetts, put up 8 new windmills outside of or just off the waters, used a tremendous amount of copper. If that copper had come from Alaska and it was economically feasible to produce here, it could potentially have brought a windfall of cash into the state to develop resources further and to put that money into the pockets of citizens so that we can guard against the economic doldrums that they're so afraid of on their side of the house. What this means is that Alaska could corner early a global market on renewable technology and begin to diversify away from oil, even though that is still going to be a major aspect of our economy. So, given that mining is such a major part of the economy, as Jim told you, and given that oil has been the pillar of that economy for the past few years, I think it's only clear that if you have a president in power who has made it their explicit goal to clear away roadblocks for development, to ensure that states have the ability and the autonomy to make their own economic way forward and to not be held back by national policy, that is an incredibly good thing. It means that so many of the roadblocks which have barred our way for so long are going to be lifted, and the people of Alaska are very good at getting down to business when you just get out of their way. That's why we are so excited for a Trump presidency, because when all of these roadblocks are lifted, when the red tape is cleared, that's when Alaskans can begin to get to work. That's when we can begin to create jobs, the metric of success that Jim gave you for this round. So at the end of this debate, if there's one thing that you take away, I want it to be this, that Alaska is a resource-based economy, and it's going to remain so for a significant amount of time. Therefore, the best way to ensure that Alaska can thrive is to have someone in power whose stated goal is to ensure that we can continue developing our resources sustainably and effectively. That is what Donald Trump has said. It has made an explicit purpose in his appointments of Scott Pruitt and Ryan Zinke throughout the cabinet. We have perhaps the most energy-friendly, resource-friendly, Alaska-friendly cabinet that we have ever seen. It's time for us to join the economic big league. And yes, I can tell you right now that it's going to be huge.
Our thanks to Sam for his arguments. To close out this first portion of the debate, we're going to give equal time to the con side. We'll invite Jacob now to the podium to offer our last-minute speech in opposition to the topic before us. Jacob.
I'm really glad Sam decided to start off his speech by modeling good discourse and insulting John and I's bow tie. But I'll do my best to defend Team Bowtie and talk a lot about how he has characterized Alaska in a way that is unfair and in a way that is not, in fact, the truth. He has used his alternative facts to try and pull the veil over your eyes and show you policies that don't benefit our state. They benefit middle America. A couple of points of direct deconstruction to what we heard from the last two proposition speakers. So a couple of appointments were listed in how their experience is going to lead to them being very good individuals. Unfortunately, there is a large administration that he has picked for the running of the national government. An attorney general who consistently looks to deny the rights of people, especially those people who live in Alaska, the people who want to destroy the EPA, which they openly advocate for, or the Department of Energy, which they seem to be useless. We don't think that these are good standard bearers for what makes good governance. In fact, we think that this is an administration that doesn't really believe in government, an interesting choice for their line of work that they decided to go into. The second thing that we would say is that they take a characterization of thriving based purely on jobs. And we're going to push back against that because we think a big foundation of what drives a state is its economy and the way and the number of jobs that it has. But it also looks like the types of jobs that we have, or where those profits are going, or whether or not people have access to good health care and a standard of living that is beneficial. Because just any old job isn't something that I think, or anyone in this room, should actually believe is the foundation of what makes a strong state. Three things that I want to talk about directly in this speech. First, we'll discuss industry. Secondly, we'll discuss inflation. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about healthcare. First, on industry. This idea of oil is very fascinating. He says that we're going to open up Anwar and that we're going to have wonderful economic policy once we get more oil flowing down the pipeline. A couple of problems with this. The first is that we've had numerous opportunities in the past to open up Anwar. Times under Bush administrations when you had a Republican Congress, when you had a Republican governor, and you were still unable to open up this type of economic development. But additionally, we would say that the large amounts of infrastructure and corporate backing isn't simply there. Because the problem is that oil in Alaska is far more expensive than a lot of the other oil around the world and around the country. States like North Dakota and Texas are going to be the main people who are benefiting and profiting off of the new lower EPA regulations, not us. When you remove the types of tariffs that exist currently and the economic sanctions against Russia and allow for a $500 billion Exxon deal to be occurring and happening within Russia, we don't think that those profits lead to jobs here in our state. We think that that leads to oil executives from Exxon who live in Texas making a lot of money. There may be overall GDP growth, but that's not growth for us. That's not money that's going into our pockets or into our economy. That's making sure that the offices of BP and Exxon get smaller as they move to other locations that have cheaper oil. Second, let's talk about fishing, because they say that we should open up the Pebble Mine and destroy a lot of the subsistence fishing that is actually going to be happening. Beyond that, what we would tell you, though, is that John was absolutely right when he was talking about tariffs. We're not just talking about putting tariffs on China so that they can't beat our exports, but we're talking about the punitive measures that when China gets tariffs put on them, they're no longer very happy with us. They no longer think that we're good trading partners who should have equally beneficial trade between us. Instead, what they're going to say is maybe we shouldn't go to Alaska to buy our cod, or to buy our pollock, to buy our salmon, or to buy our crab. Instead, we'll go to some other country who's not taxing us at 35% to access one of the strongest markets around the globe. We think that that is the type of harm that you do to the Alaskan economy when you no longer have a market for us to sell to. Those are the tariffs that we're most worried about. But on the other side of it, we think that when you put really large import tariffs on things, and when you manufacture in middle America, when you have American steel or other American coal, what you're doing is you're making expensive items for the rest of Alaskans to buy. We already pay numerous amounts more for products because we live so much farther away. Increasing the amount that each Alaskan has to pay for every car, for every meal, for every other product is detrimental to the people who are worse off in our state, the ones who will be losing jobs or the ones who are going to be in far worse economic conditions. Finally, let's talk a little bit about Pebble Mine under this industry point. We think that there's a lot of copper and gold that's useful and could potentially be utilized. But one of the great things about democracies is that states and communities have the ability to voice their opinions. Not once, but twice have we turned down the type of legislation on a statewide level to actually open up Pebble Mine. We don't think that this is the type of action that maybe Trump alone could get over, and we don't really see the change of heart happening among the people of Alaska to destroy the subsistence agriculture, the subsistence fishing, or any of the other environmental beauty that we have in our country. So until they tell us why those restrictions are going to go away, we think that the federal changes aren't simply enough to open up mines that the state has decided is not good. On to this secondary point of inflation. The economy goes much further than simply the jobs that exist, but the amount that you have to pay for different items. I talked about this a little bit in the prices of individual products going up a little bit. Those being, we have to sell our fish at higher prices even though we're getting less of the profits because other countries are taxing us a whole lot more, making us less competitive. But we also think that these large tax cuts that are going to billionaires, not many of which are actually the few of you who are sitting in this room, but if you are, I'm happy to work for you at any point, we would tell you that those type of tax cuts lead to the American dollar continuing to inflate and the salaries that you actually do have not being able to purchase nearly as much as it used to. It was great way back when you could buy a Coke for 5 cents, but the problem is that inflation continues to march on and our salaries don't seem to be going up. The wage and the ability to purchase things and median average income has gone down in terms of purchasing power over time, largely due to the amount of tax cuts and the destruction of the middle class that we continue to see. We don't think that those benefits are going to help any of you because the money that we are raising from the government is going to be going into a place in the country that manufactures things. One thing that's problematic about Alaska is we don't have an economy that's very good at manufacturing things when we're so far away. Finally, let's talk about healthcare. The quality of living that exists within our state is already very, very expensive. Beyond that, we have a very small supply of doctors and have to pay a lot more to make sure that medical equipment and medical suppliers are willing to work up here. When you continue to eviscerate the Affordable Care Act, which they say they will repeal, but refuse outright to provide a plan for, refuse outright to provide a plan for, as well as continue to make cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, we think that those are the things that the state has to pick up. I don't know if any of you have seen the budget shortfall recently. I imagine because you're the type of people who are willing to come to a debate and engage within civil discourse, you understand that it's not so great. And creating privatized, voucherized systems for Medicare, Medicaid, and the VA doesn't seem like a very responsible manner for taking care of the citizens who are worse off in our state. What they showed you was a story of an Alaska that grows. Unfortunately, like Northern Economics told us, it's a story of an Alaska that will shrink. And you're only throwing oil on the fire with Trump. Trump led a campaign that was talking about bringing the voices back to the forgotten. I'm sorry to tell you that as Alaskans, we're the forgotten of the forgotten. The policies that he has created are for middle America. They're for American steel and American manufacturing. For the exporters and the oil markets and the fisheries of Alaska, we will only be harmed. This is not thriving, this is dying. Very proud to oppose.
My thanks to all four of the debaters who outlined those arguments for and against the motion. We turn now to the second phase of our debate, where we have some opportunity to have some conversation. We're going to start by giving each of the teams a chance to ask a question of the other, get some conversation going there. I might chime in with a couple of questions that I've had, given the arguments that were made by each side. And providing we have some time left, we'll turn it over to you to give you a shot at asking some questions of these advocates about the arguments that they've made. But let's start here. Pro side, this is your chance. Is there a question that you'd like to ask the con side based upon some of the stances that they've taken? Well,
Can I project?
what if you grab that microphone up there, Sam?
Better?
Much.
All right. Technical hiccups out of the way. So, Mr. Havelock, you tell us that the Alaskan economy is set on a course for implosion, basically, that we're in a very bad spot right now. And then Jacob tells us that things like inflation are only going to get worse. So wouldn't it be better if we had a president who was at least willing to lift restrictions on things like resource development so we can get people jobs, so they can have access to economic opportunities if times are going to get so rough?
All right. Is your microphone working? That one's not working either. Jacob, would you mind? No, we got it, John. We got it. So the question, I know.
What the hell was the question?
The question was you've claimed we've got a lot to be worried about with regard to Alaska's future, referencing the downturn that was talked about by Northern Economics and by ICER. Sam's question was, isn't it better, given the context that we face there, to ease restrictions and regulations that might inhibit our ability to engage in resource extraction, at the very least to generate some jobs in the face of that coming economic recession?
Well, there are two aspects to that. One is this creating jobs, frankly, does not do the right thing for the economy, because we're kind of used to this free ride economy, and you say, oh, we'll get more jobs here. Nobody's paying any taxes. So what happens is, and Governor Hammond pointed this out regularly, what happens is that the resources that you do have for government are apportioned more narrowly. You've got more people that need public safety, but you have no more money to support public safety. So a mere jobs policy doesn't do it if there isn't anything. And I don't see where I've heard anything that says that Trump's approach to getting rid of EPA is going to produce more jobs. In fact, the attack on the federal government undermines or destroys one of the three basic pillars of the Alaskan economy. All Alaskan economists agree that somewhere between 1/3 to 1/4 of our whole economy is based on the fact that you've got all these feds around here doing good work and paying taxes and more to the point, shopping and going to restaurants and so on. There are probably several of you out here.
Very good. Thank you very much. We'll give now, and you're welcome to take a seat, John. It always makes me nervous when you stand up because I know that I'm going to have a hard time keeping you in time. Once you stand up and start wandering and give you a microphone, you'll go on forever. I'll give the opportunity now to the con side. Is there a question that you would like to ask of the pro side based upon the arguments they've made?
Yeah, so how can a person with very little education, whether that be formally through college or whether that be pure experience in government, lead an entire administration towards all of these hosts of benefits that you actually are claiming that are going to happen to our state?
All right, so a question about experience and leadership. Jim, you want to respond to that one?
Certainly, if you look at Donald Trump, I'd say half the world discounted his capabilities. He's the President of the United States now. I had the honor of working for Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan used to be described as the partner of Bonzo, and they used discrediting factors and carved him up. That's what happens in politics. I reject that approach to politics, by the way. John Havelock is a buddy of mine, and I think he's a really smart guy. We can have a difference of opinion in politics without butchering each other, and we need to get back to that today. Donald Trump is more than qualified to be president. He's got an excellent education. He's got an excellent experience. He built a worldwide business that is very competently run, one of the best out there. Let's celebrate. In my family, we use kind of a watchword, and that is, count your blessings, not your problems. With Donald Trump, you might not like him yet, but he will do a great job as president. No one's going to outwork him, and you can see that from having, I saw it firsthand in the campaign. He's a worker. He's got the right philosophy. I used to say when the gas line was an economically viable project, which it is not any longer, unfortunately, that we should have Donald Trump as the negotiator-in-chief. I want him advocating for Alaska. And I'll tell you, The cabinet with Rex Tillerson there, they know Alaska very well. We're in for a good time with the Trump administration. They'll do great.
All right. Sure. Sam, you want to add on to that? How
Real
about
brief. Not
briefly,
quite.
briefly,
Yeah,
please.
not quite as eloquent, but I think the business experience, and especially of his cabinet, actually brings quite a breath of fresh air in the case that many of these crises in Alaska are politically created. I don't think you would argue that we need more political lifers in Juneau to fix this problem. I think in many cases, having an executive with business experience who knows how to get things done and knows how to play the game, as it were, with other countries is an incredibly valuable thing to have for a state like Alaska.
All right. All right. Well, interestingly, the question of competence and the question of cooperation is one of the things that I started to wonder about as I was listening to the arguments exchanged between the teams. But I also want to go first to the con side to ask a question. We've heard about the teams that President Trump is assembling, and certainly he's going to need Congress now more than ever for his ambitious agenda. Won't the fact that he has to cooperate with our congressional representatives, particularly those who hold influential positions, like Senator Murkowski's chairmanship of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, won't that empower those representatives to negotiate more successfully on behalf of our state?
The short answer is yes, but Senator Sullivan, who happens to be a good friend of mine, is a big supporter of Pebble, and the idea that we are going to, benefit our economy by opening up Pebble. The whole idea that whole copper and all that nonsense is going to make us all millionaires is ridiculous. That money all goes outside. It's oil. Oil has been the deal, and as long as oil prices are where they are now, we do not have any way to avoid, a Trumpian disaster.
Jacob, feel free.
The one quick thing that I would add is the question relies upon the assumption that the Trump administration actually wants to work with Congress. And they both technically call themselves Republicans, but I would argue that they're not really the same type of Republican, nor do they see eye to eye on most things. In fact, Trump ran on a campaign of draining the swamp. I'm unsure that the type of cooperation and agreement is really going to be there that you might think would happen when you have a unified presidency in Congress. In fact, I think that there will be lots more political battles being picked as those individuals try and appeal with Donald Trump to gain votes, or those try and push back against him because that's what they think will help them get reelected in the future.
All right. So my question for the pro side goes to that very issue of what we benefit economically from. Just today, President Trump signed an executive order to withdraw the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He has also routinely referred to a 35% tariffs on goods imported from companies that don't place primacy on American workers. Both of these policies may lead to significant trade wars with other nations. Won't Alaska's extraction and export-based economy suffer if conducting business globally becomes more difficult?
The actions of the president do not create an impediment to further trade. Our fish is going to sell because it's the greatest salmon in the world. We send air freighters into Cordova every spring because our red salmon are exceptional. We've got great waters, and that is the Copper River, by the way, just so the other side understands it. Copper was kind of evident in that river. That's kind of why they named it that way. There is a strong growth pattern if the Alaskan economy can be unleashed. It needs to be. It has been held back by people who want to make us a park and preserve it. And my good friend wants parkland. I like parkland too. I'm an environmentalist. My son and I hunt and fish all over the state of Alaska. And we care as much of the environment as any person in Alaska. He's fourth generation. We've got a fifth generation on the way. So we're going to take care of our land. We can have both. That's the uniqueness of Alaska, is that we can benefit from the resources that we have, including the fish, including the timber, including copper. and extractive industries. We can do so with a multiple use of land and need to do so to save our economy from those who would shut us down.
Very good. I'd like to now give you a chance to ask some questions, but first a technical issue. Are those table mics working yet? They are, fantastic. If I could ask a couple of students from the Seawolf Debate program to come up and grab the microphones that originally were on the podiums. John, yours is going to be on this side. There you go. So while they're doing that, we are going to review some rules about how we're going to conduct ourselves during this process. First of all, I'm going to give you the chance to ask a question. I want to emphasize for you, I'm going to give the chance to ask a question. A question is an interrogative statement that is brief, that is pointed, that demands a response, and usually ends with an inflection at the conclusion of that sentence. If you can't imagine a question mark at the end of your sentence, you're not asking a question. So please, keep in mind that this is not a chance for you to give a speech. It's not a chance for you to try and persuade everyone else of your opinion. It is a chance for you to ask questions of the four advocates that are up here arguing this issue. If you want to give a speech, come and talk to me afterwards. I love arranging debates, and we can find a time and a place for you to do so. Remember, too, the 3 T's of public debate that we talked about earlier: tolerance, thoughtfulness, and truth. Those are going to be our guidelines for how we're going to conduct ourselves in this process. And finally, I'm going to resist calling this a safe space to ask questions, but I would say that what we're going to try and create here is an atmosphere conducive to critical thought and conducive to seeking the truth through a reasoned argument. So with all of those restrictions and admonitions in place, is there anybody who'd like to ask a question? Raise your hand. I've got those folks on either side that would be willing to come to you. John, Robert, find the first person who's close to you and give them a chance to ask a question. Raise them up high. John, work your way up there, and we'll see who has a question to ask. Where are we at? There we go. Okay. Give us your name. If you wouldn't mind standing up. There you go. Stand up. Give us your name.
I'm Denise Runge.
Thank you very much. And a question. Is it directed at one side in particular, or do you have a question that both could answer?
The question is for both sides.
Okay. Go ahead, please.
To both of you, I would like for you to address Mr. Trump's cabinet, and specifically, given his prior statements that he intended to drain the swamp, how do you see the choice of individuals with deep ties to Wall Street and prior government service as affecting his proposal to drain the swamp?
All right. I'm going to throw that first to the pro side. So,
I'd be delighted to answer that question. Donald Trump is the first guy that I have ever seen as President of the United States who's told everybody who comes to work for the administration they cannot lobby after they work for the administration. That's an amazing statement. We are not going to have the revolving door of the Obama White House anymore, where you regulate one day, then you go collect what you regulated from the day after. So I think that's a very, very strong government reform, and I'm proud of the man for doing it. I think it's just the right tone for those who are in Washington. They should not be benefiting from those of us who are governed. They should be serving us. Donald Trump gets it.
all right. Con side, you're without a microphone. Well, we can't have that, can we?
I think it's a total joke to think about a cabinet made up entirely of billionaires or close to, or with a few hundred millionaires thrown in, that they're going to be taking care of the poor folks down here in the middle class or the working class. Joke.
Succinct, but to the point. Do we have a question on this side of the house? There's somebody over here who'd like to ask a question. Give us your name, please.
James Stinson.
And let us know which side you'd like to ask, or maybe to both.
It's going to be for the opposition. I understand the fears about a trade
Sorry,
war.
Jim, would you get up closer to the microphone, please?
It's going to be for the opposition. I understand the fears of a trade war with China, particularly when it comes to finished goods. My question is, you're talking about a country called China with over 1 billion people that's exceedingly resource hungry. Do you really think a state like Alaska that exports commodities is going to be affected by tariffs when a country like China is going to want to buy things like gold, copper, oil, etc.? why would the hunger for natural resources change even if we're getting into a tariff situation with finished products?
All right, to our con side.
Well, I think that there would be potentially three things that we would be selling to China. We're either selling seafood, we're selling oil, or we're selling natural resources. And if you were to say put a 35% tariff on anything coming from the United States going into China, it changes the competitiveness of what's actually going to be able to be bought. What China's currently doing is they're investing very much so within Africa to make sure that they have those natural resources and creating global supply chains that they don't have to have anyone interfere with if we decided we wanted to raise their prices. So we don't think that actually having our natural resources is something that they particularly need. But even if we have the best fish in Alaska, and I'll happily agree with that point from the proposition, I would argue that when your fish is 35% more expensive than anybody else's, you're going to go to another place to find a way to purchase it. And that competitive advantage that you lose is what's inevitably harmful, whether that's because they're not buying for us or because we get a lot less profit because we have to lower our overall prices to meet those trade tariffs that are coming from a trade war.
All right, let's take another one from this side of the house. Robert, are you near someone who's got a question? Fantastic. Will you please give us your name?
Okay. Yeah, my name is Barrett Stramber, Granite Mining LLC. I have a gold mine over in Prince William Sound. I have 50 million ounces in it. And Mr. Havelock, why is it that the EPA is down my throat and doing everything to shut me down? Why is it, being a new company, why don't they want me in business? Why aren't they taking me by the hand and walking me through the regulations?
All right.
That's just one question.
And a good one. No, we're going to give you the answer to that question. I appreciate it. I think there are a lot of independent miners in the state of Alaska. I think it's well worth asking, why isn't the EPA is not set up to facilitate those regulatory navigational processes? Mr. Havelock.
Well, I'm not sure, obviously you've got a very specific problem that you're dealing with. The likeliest thing I would guess that they're creating a problem for you is that in gold mining there's a whole lot of use of water. And the Congress, if your complaint may be with the Congress, with the Clean Water Act, has instructed the EPA to regulate the amount of other minerals that can be dropped into the rivers from gold mining. As far as the educational aspect, if the Congress funded the EPA so that they would, besides having an enforcement, they would have an educational aspect, I would be all for that. But I expect that they don't get that kind of money, and if they ask for it, the congressional committees involved would say, forget it.
All right, I think we have time for one more question from the audience. We'll take someone from this side of the house. John, I can't see you out there. I got lights in my face, but I trust that you'll find somebody who has a question to ask of one or both sides of the debate. Again, if you have a question, raise your hand up. There, it looks like he's found someone. If you would stand up, please, and give us your name.
Sorry. This is Tuck Sims from Homer, Alaska, originally. Just moved to Anchorage not too long ago. So my question is pertaining to the cons. With the fact that you guys giving all these situations that are going against everything Trump's saying he'll do, I was wondering what you'd say that Alaska should do for an increase in our economic standing, given that Trump is going about it all wrong.
All right, there's a good question. So if the con side takes the position that there's not much to be gained under a Trump presidency, what would be the ideal? What should Alaska do to improve its economic outlook?
Well, we need to recognize that we are no longer the economy that takes a free ride on oil revenue, and look at the other options. And that means an income tax, and raising some of those other taxes that have been sitting there forever, that have not been reflected in the fact of the change in the value of the dollar. And what else? Anybody add it?
I like the tag team approach. That works. So Jacob, what do you think Alaska must do? If you're not optimistic about our chances under a Trump presidency, what would make you optimistic?
I left off one thing, of course, which is we have a terrible oil taxation policy. The moment we are subsidizing them to the tune of, $1 billion a year, that's nuts. And when the value went up from $40 a barrel to $50 a barrel, we should have gotten the taxes worth at least a third of that increase, and we're not getting any. So, because the fact of the matter is that state support and federal support of our economy here is critical, and I think growth in the private economy will reflect that kind of growth in our support through taxation, in particular state taxation.
So very quickly, I'll try and talk a little bit about jobs. And as a college student who's currently looking for a job in Alaska after I graduate, it's probably not too rosy. It's probably not a wonderful thing. But there are certain industries that will be here that will always be here. There is responsible resource extraction that can be done without harming the environment very much. And you get that cheap oil when it's coming out of Prudhoe Bay, and those jobs will still be there for a little while. And the fishing jobs that are there will be there no matter what, as long as we don't destroy the salmon runs or we don't destroy any of our other wildlife. I think another opportunity is to grow our tourism and make it so that people can be here. But the real truth of the matter, in my opinion, is that we're going to have a smaller economy. We're not going to be growing and vibrant. But when you add Trump's policies into that, you destroy some of those few industries that actually can persist and are going to persist in good manners while creating a lot more risks, like, as John talked about, the Exxon Valdez oil spill, when you start to entirely eliminate departments that are trying to protect the natural beauty and the safety of this state.
All right. I think a round of applause is due to all four of our debaters for their answers and willingness to answer those questions. We are going to move now to the summary phase of the debate. The way it works is like this. Each team, not each speaker, each team gets 1 5-minute opportunity to summarize the case that they have made against or for the motion. And we're going to start with the con side. The tradition in academic debating is that those who are on the proposition side get the first word and the last word. So we're going to give our first chance to the summary speech to our con side speakers to deliver their argument. I would remind you, listen carefully to these summary speeches. Ultimately, you're going to get a chance to vote again in just a few minutes once these summary speeches are done on what your position is relative to the motion based upon the arguments that you've heard. We'll reopen that poll once we get done with these summary speeches and give you a chance to voice your opinion on that issue. So, without any further ado now, I'd like to open the floor to our con side summary speaker to give his 5-minute speech in response to the motion. Hear it.
Three things that I'm going to touch on in this speech. First, we're going to talk about the environment and the role that regulation plays. Secondly, we're going to talk about government jobs. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about industry. First, on the environment. One of the things that's great about being partnered with John Havelock is he is a fascinating person. He's lived a life that is interesting and full of wonderful experiences. One of those was working directly after the Exxon Valdez oil spill and figuring out why exactly those events transpired and trying to hold accountable the oil companies who led to one of the largest environmental devastations that has ever happened in American history. One of the things that they found out in his research and in his findings that we got to talk about over lunch is the biggest problem that they had is they doubled the size of the tankard without changing the size of their crew when they were driving it into Valdez. This led to a whole bunch of small actions that led to the neglect that destroyed some of the environment in our state and led to lost profits and lost jobs. The issues that come from regulation are, yes, that they are expensive, but they're necessary. And when you have a state government who is not funding those environmental programs, or a national government who does not have those environmental protections in place that are making sure that degradation doesn't happen, you interfere with the rest of the economy. If they decided that that's how they wanted to create jobs, right, you need people to clean up all the oil, we would say that's probably a pretty bad idea for the future of our state. Yes, regulations hurt some small business owners, but they protect many major industries that make sure that our country can thrive and that we can give onus to the native communities that continue to subsist off of those types of work. Second, onto this idea of government jobs. So they gave you a proposal in their first speech about moving Elmendorf across a river and building a new base. We don't think that the state really has the money for this, and we don't really see the reason why the national government wants to move the military base a couple of miles. Yes, it might create some jobs, but that's a pretty useless way of doing things, in my opinion. But in addition to that, we don't see the necessity of funding Alaska when we are the main buttress against a Russian enemy and have been for the past 40 years, when our Secretary of State and President are now very good friends with him. If anything, we think that the type of military movement that you will have is a military that instead exists in Hawaii and Japan to push back against China in the Senkaku Islands or North Korea. Those are locations and locales that don't benefit us as citizens. It might be wonderful that we get national security benefits and avoid ever being in a Cold War again with Russia. But if we're talking about a country that has, or talking about a state that for the most part has many military individuals who have guaranteed salaries, who are investing in our economy, who are attending small businesses and making sure that we have kids going through our education programs, then we probably don't have much of a future when those are gutted. In addition to the military, the type of research that is done up here because of the unique climate that we have, or the state money, or the federal money that goes to our state to create state jobs also seems to be gutted. The fact of the matter is that we can't do more with less, and we're going to have to do less with less. When Alaska gets neglected and there are less jobs up here, it not only hurts all the people who won't be having those jobs and who are moving to other parts of the country or other parts of the world, but it hurts individuals who are no longer getting those people coming into their businesses and serving patronage like you might have, because I, for one, am a military brat, and I bet many of you have many connections to types of groups like the military or other government-funded jobs who simply wouldn't have ever made it up to this state if it wasn't for the type of funding that comes from that. Finally, on this idea of industry. A lot of this debate has been about economics and how we get to thriving. But the fact of the matter is they don't improve our chances of competing in a worldwide oil market. Loosening the restrictions that exist on Russia and making sure that there are less regulations for Texas and North Dakota just means that they don't have to pay for the shipping costs and don't have to abide by any of the regulations either. Those types of harms mean that we aren't competitive in oil and don't have the ability, because it costs us $60 to produce a barrel of oil and it costs them $40. Guess where all of the investment is going to be going? Guess where all of the jobs are going to be going? Finally, though, we think that the dangers that you put other industries in when you start to limit the amount of potential visas that will be coming to this country because you're engaging in trade wars for tourism, or when you're destroying natural salmon fisheries or natural salmon runs that fisheries depend upon to continue into existence, we think that you create an economy that Alaska will be stifling, not thriving. Yes, it is horrible that we have to be up here and be the pessimistic team that our state is going downhill, but that's just the way that it looks to us, and that's the way that it looks to everyone else who we have read and who we have engaged with, absent two people. We think that in this debate, it comes down to whether or not our state will thrive, and what we see is a future of a smaller state, and a smaller state that's being pushed that way because a new President Trump has forgotten about us. Very, very proud to oppose.
For the last word in this debate now, we'll turn our attention back to the pro side. It looks like Sam is prepared to offer that 5-minute summary speech on behalf of those in support of the motion. The floor is yours, Sam. And Sam, I'd remind you, that microphone is pretty, not very sensitive, so get up close to it. I know you're tall,
All right.
but it might help if you get a little closer to it. There you go.
The opposition in this debate has asked us to accept a slow decline into mediocrity. That is not what we believe the future holds for Alaska, because Alaskans have always been the people to fight against mediocrity, to be excellent, and to take every opportunity that is given to us to be more. We've beaten the odds in the past, and we're going to do it again, because now we have someone in the Oval Office who understands what our strengths are and will stop getting in the way every time we try to play to them. I'm going to summarize this debate with 2 questions. First, I'm going to talk about what happens to our resources, and second, I'm going to talk about what happens to our people. On our resources, first, let's talk about oil, because the opposition seems to think that because it's expensive to develop oil in Alaska, that means companies aren't going to do it. The problem is that fracking, as is the practice in North Dakota or other competitors domestically he names, is far more expensive than development on the North Slope, because you have to literally drill through and blast layers of rock that are exceedingly dense to get through. The oil on the North Slope, on the other hand, is comparatively easy to get through once you get through that first layer of snow and ice. That is why we tell you we still retain competition in this arena. Not to mention, there is still the existing infrastructure of the pipeline and all the drilling rigs that are already there that significantly lower costs, as opposed to the rigs that have to be ported around for all the different wildcat drillers in North Dakota. That is why we tell you our oil still remains competitive. Second, let's talk about tariffs, because they tell us that there's going to be this global trade war, ignoring the fact that many countries around the world depend on the United States and all of our products, and aren't going to be able to have the political power to slap sanctions on us in retaliation. But additionally, as I told you in my speech, we believe that domestic demand in many cases will be more than enough to substitute for this production. Even if China doesn't buy any of our copper, we tell you that states like Massachusetts and New York that are looking into expanding renewable technology provide a tremendous domestic market for that copper and are more than willing to pay Americans to produce for them. Next, let's talk about the EPA regulation, because I think the gentleman that spoke during the question time had a fantastic point. The EPA did not prevent the Exxon Valdez, but what they are doing is preventing thousands of business owners across the state from opening up economic opportunities for themselves and others. They use one instance of economic degradation to justify a slow economic strangulation of everyone else who ever attempts to do anything with the natural resources in this land. That is not a trade-off that we are willing to accept. We trust the people of Alaska who live in this state to understand what steps they need to take care of it, far more than a Washington bureaucrat who looks at it on a map but has never actually seen or experienced the value of that wilderness. That is why we believe we are more than capable of developing while not sacrificing the environment. Finally now, let's talk about the people and what happens to them. There was this quote from one of the speakers on the opposition side that jobs really aren't that important and that it doesn't give that much of a boost to the economy. I would beg to differ to an incredible extent. A job is not just a source of income, which is better than being on the state dole, but it is the ability for that individual to get out of bed in the morning, to know they have something productive to do, to go to it, to advance themselves, and to feel like they're contributing to the economy. That is an incredibly valuable thing that oftentimes provides even more value to a state that is stuck in economic doldrums. When people feel like they have a future, like jobs are available, then people who are graduating from the university, like Jacob and I, might want to stay in state instead of fleeing because we've acknowledged that Alaska's never going to get better and there's nothing Trump can do about it. Additionally, one of the opportunities that they suggested to us an alternative was taxation. I think it's pretty clear that at the point at which they've conceded we're going into economic doldrums, the last thing we want to do is pile on with more taxation and more theft of revenue from business owners who are already struggling to keep their businesses afloat. Finally now, let's talk about healthcare, because this was a very important point. I think one of the things that is holding back healthcare in this state is in many ways the edicts of Washington that have made it impossible to develop our infrastructure and deliver healthcare to villages. When King Cove is kept from building a road to get people to a hospital because there is a few species of waterfowl that might be disturbed, that puts a tremendous economic cost upon those individuals. Trump's administration and the Interior Secretary have already said that getting the King Cove Road is a priority for them and will be a priority moving forward. That is why we believe that the Trump administration is better suited, because they recognize that the environment and the economy and people all have to be balanced, and we can't continue to favor one over the other as we have for so long. At the end of this debate, if you believe that there is nothing Trump can do for this state, then vote for the opposition. But if you believe, as we have told you, that Alaska is a development economy and we now have someone who understands the importance of that development, then vote for proposition, because our better days are ahead of us, because we now have someone who recognizes that we have potential, we have strength, we are the future. Let's head north to it again.
My most sincere thanks to both of these teams. We are going to reopen our poll now. This is a poll that is a different one from the first one we did. This is going to be our post-debate poll. And there are several things that are the same, but several things that are different. Fundamentally, the question is the same, whether or not Alaska will benefit from the Trump administration. The difference is that you're not going to see this one update dynamically. So as you text your answers in, as you text your opinion in based upon whether you agree with, disagree with, or still remain neutral on the question, you're not going to see that update dynamically. Instead, we're going to wait until we've captured all of your input, and then we'll go back and do a comparison to what the audience's attitude was before that debate began. While you're doing that, allow me to offer some thank yous. First, my most sincere and heartfelt thank you to Jim Crawford and Sam Erickson on the pro side, to John Havelock and Jacob Shercliffe on the opposition side. They've given us a great deal to think about here, and they presented it in a very eloquent fashion. Thank you to both of them. I'd like to say thank you to GCI for providing us with a high-speed internet that allows us to live stream these debates. A big thank you to the Beartooth Theater Pub for being a terrific venue in which our community can gather to have these discussions, and particularly to the Alaska Dispatch News for being such an incredible source of commentary and information for our community. We very much appreciate their partnership on having these discussions and look forward to continuing that in the future. But perhaps most importantly, I want to thank you, all of Anchorage, for being such incredible supporters of both our debate program at the University of Alaska Anchorage as well as quality discourse in general. I'll be honest, I was a bit trepidatious in having this debate. I thought that some might view this as a terrific opportunity to stand up, take charge of the situation, and voice their own opinions either for or against this motion, with or without my consent. But you all engaged this question very well, and I very much appreciate your ongoing commitment to that civil discourse. As I say at the end of all of these debates, remember that a debate never ends a conversation, it always begins those conversations. And I rely upon all of you to continue having these conversations with your fellow residents so that we all might collectively be improved. Now, I think we've given enough time to allow you to get your opinion entered. If we could go back to our pre-debate poll and take a look at what our opinion was before the debate began. Before the debate, the audience's survey produced this. 27% of those voting in favor of the motion, that is, that Alaska will thrive under a Trump presidency. 51% opposed to that motion, believing that Alaska will not thrive, and 22% remaining neutral, preferring to hear the arguments before they voice their opinion. If we could now take a look at our post-debate poll and do our reveal. So we have a yes side that went from 27 to 37 for a gain of 10 percentage points, a no side that went from 51 to 54 for a gain of 3 percentage points. This debate goes to the proposition. Congratulations to those who argued for optimism on behalf of the presidency. Once again, my most sincere thanks to all of you. Drive safely out there. It's incredibly snowy, which is a wonderful thing in and of itself. And I look forward to having you back here for our next Arguing Alaska debate series.